Friends, I've been sharing with you that something new was on the horizon, and now it's truly here. For a while now, many of us have sensed a stirring, a feeling that something significant was approaching. Not just a minor adjustment, but a genuine turning point in our lives and in our world. And here we are. The changes we're witnessing aren't just ideas anymore. They're unfolding right before our eyes, touching our daily lives. Today, I want us to rise above the noise and look at what's happening with clarity, not through the lens of fear or worry, but from a perspective of divine opportunity, unshakable resilience, and wise preparation. Let's start at the beginning, because when we understand these foundations, everything else will begin to make sense. There's a fundamental difference in the pace of change we experience it today compared to when many of us, including myself, Pastor Joel Osteen, were growing up. When I look back at the 60s, 70s, and 80s, major shifts unfolded over decades. A new technology, like television becoming widespread or personal computers arriving in offices, might take 15 or 20 years to truly transform how people lived and worked. Political shifts were gradual. Economic trends developed slowly, giving families, communities, and entire industries time to adapt and adjust. Even the oil crisis of 1972, which was considered rapid, played out over several years. People had time to respond. There was breathing room, time to think, time to plan. But now it feels like everything is happening in fast forward. What used to take decades now unfolds in years, sometimes even months. It's like watching a movie at double speed, except this movie is our real life, our economy, our neighborhoods, our world. Political winds shift overnight. Economic policies are announced on Monday and can start affecting prices by Friday. International relationships that took years to build can seem to crumble in a matter of weeks. This acceleration isn't just about technology, though that's certainly a part of God's plan unfolding. It's about how interconnected everything has become. When something happens in one part of the world, perhaps a factory closure far away, a significant decision in Washington, or even a natural event in a distant land, the ripple effects reach our American communities faster than ever before. But remember, God is never surprised by change. So what exactly is unfolding? And why does it matter to you and your precious family? Let's start with something that touches every household budget. Think about how you manage your monthly expenses. If the cost of groceries suddenly jumps, say by 20 or 30%, you don't just absorb that increase and pretend nothing happened, do you? No, you wisely make adjustments. Perhaps you shop at different stores, choose different brands, or dine out a little less frequently. You might look for ways to increase your income, maybe working a few extra hours or finding a part-time opportunity. Or you might dip into savings temporarily while you figure out a long-term solution. The point is, you can't ignore the basic realities. If costs go up significantly, something else has to shift. You adapt because you have to. The alternative, pretending the challenge doesn't exist, can lead to financial distress. And friends, the same fundamental principle applies to entire countries and their economic policies, but on a much larger scale, affecting millions of people. Right now, we're seeing some fascinating situations unfold where political promises, though well-intended, sometimes collide with economic reality. Our leaders make commitments that sound very appealing on the surface, but when you look closely at the details, when you truly do the math, sometimes the numbers don't quite add up. It's like promising your family you'll cut monthly expenses by $300, while at the same time planning an expensive vacation, a kitchen renovation, and a new car purchase. The words sound nice, but the math simply doesn't align. Let me give you a concrete example that's affecting everyone's wallet right now. You've probably heard discussions about tariffs, which are essentially taxes placed on goods coming from other countries. The political message sounds incredibly hopeful. We'll make foreign companies pay these taxes, and that money will protect American jobs and strengthen our economy. It's presented as a way to stand strong and help our American workers. But here's where basic economics meets an uncomfortable reality. When a company from China, Mexico, or Germany wants to sell something in the American market, they don't actually write a check directly to the U.S. Treasury. That's not how tariffs work. Instead, the American company that's importing those goods, whether it's a major retailer or a small business owner bringing in specialized equipment, pays that tariff to the government. It's like if your neighbor ordered something online and somehow you got stuck paying the shipping and handling fees. That American importer then faces a choice: absorb the extra cost and reduce their profit margins, or pass that cost along to customers through higher prices. And friends, we know which option most businesses choose, especially when everyone in their industry faces the same additional costs. The result is entirely predictable. You, the American consumer, end up paying more at the store. The very people these policies were supposedly designed to help, our middle-class families, retirees on fixed incomes, working Americans trying to make their dollar stretch further, often end up bearing the financial burden. And here's where this becomes even more complex and, frankly, a concern. We're not talking about small tariffs on a few rare items. The current approach involves substantial taxes on goods from some of America's biggest trading partners, countries that supply everything from our smartphones and laptops to clothing and shoes, from raw materials used in construction to components that go into American-made products. When you add up all these extra costs rippling through our entire economy, it creates significant upward pressure on prices across virtually every category of goods that families purchase. The family trying to buy a new refrigerator pays more. The retiree buying prescription medications pays more. The young couple furnishing their first apartment pays more. Now let's step back and remember what truly motivated many of the recent shifts in our nation. People were frustrated and concerned about the rising cost of living. They felt like their paychecks weren't keeping up with expenses, like their retirement savings weren't stretching as far as they used to. Voters were looking for solutions to make their money go further, to bring down the cost of housing, healthcare, food, and other necessities. But some policies being implemented in response to those concerns, policies designed to address economic frustration, might actually make the underlying problem significantly worse. It's like going to the doctor with a headache and getting prescribed medicine that cures the headache but gives you a severe stomachache instead. The original problem gets solved, but you end up with a different, potentially more challenging problem. This isn't about partisan politics or taking sides, friends. This is about basic cause and effect, about understanding how economic policies truly work in practice versus how they might sound in political speeches. And these situations don't exist in isolation. They create ripple effects that spread throughout our economy, affecting international trade relationships, diplomatic alliances, and ultimately the daily financial realities of regular people trying to maintain their standard of living. The truth is, we're witnessing what happens when rhetoric meets economic reality, and the collision is creating waves that are just beginning to be felt. But remember, with God, we can always find a way to navigate these challenges. But that, friends, is only the beginning of this inspiring story. These domestic situations are playing out against the backdrop of something even more profound, a dramatic shift in global economic power that's been building for years and is now accelerating rapidly. For most of our adult lives, America and its closest allies have held a dominant position in the world economy in ways that felt almost natural, almost destined. When Washington made decisions about trade policy or interest rates, much of the world often followed. When London's financial markets opened or closed, it impacted global capital flows. And when major American companies like IBM, General Motors, or later Microsoft and Apple made strategic choices, they essentially set standards that everyone else had to meet. American companies didn't just compete in global markets, they often helped define them. Our banks didn't just participate in international finance, they controlled much of it. The US dollar wasn't just one currency among many, it was the currency that truly mattered for international trade, the one that countries around the world held as their primary reserve. For decades, this arrangement worked remarkably well for America and for us as Americans. We could run trade deficits without serious consequences because other countries needed dollars to conduct business. We could influence global economic policies because other nations depended on access to American markets and American capital. But something fundamental has been changing, and it's accelerating now at a pace that's truly remarkable to witness. You might have heard the term BRICS, originally Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, but now expanded to include several other major countries. When this group first formed about 15 years ago, many Western analysts and leaders perhaps dismissed it as an interesting experiment that wouldn't amount to much meaningful cooperation. Well, that interesting experiment now represents roughly half the world's population. Think about that for a moment. Half of all the people on Earth, more than 4 billion individuals, live in countries that are increasingly coordinating their economies, their trade policies, and their financial systems, often finding ways to operate separately from the traditional American-led international order. But raw population numbers don't tell the whole story. What's truly significant is the economic growth and momentum. While America and Europe have been navigating sluggish growth rates, often barely reaching 2 or 3% annually, many of these BRICS countries have been expanding their economies much more rapidly. We're talking about growth rates that are often double what we see in the United States, sometimes even higher. China, despite its challenges, is still growing its economy at nearly twice the rate of America. India is expanding even faster than that. Even Russia, despite international sanctions and ongoing conflicts, has managed to maintain economic growth that exceeds most Western countries. This isn't about cheering for one side or rooting against another. This is about recognizing a mathematical reality, a shift in the global landscape. When half the world's people live in countries that are growing their economies faster than yours, and when those countries are increasingly trading directly with each other rather than going through your financial systems, the entire global economic landscape begins to shift. Think of it this way. For decades, most international business operated like a wheel with America as the hub at the center, and all the spokes connecting through us. If a company in Brazil wanted to sell products to a company in India, the transaction would likely be conducted in US dollars, processed through American banks, and governed by American financial regulations. Even trade between countries that had nothing to do with America would often flow through American-controlled systems. But imagine what happens when those spokes start connecting directly to each other, creating new patterns of trade and finance that don't need to go through that traditional center. Brazilian companies start trading directly with Indian companies, using their own currencies or new digital payment systems. Chinese banks start providing financing for African infrastructure projects without involving American institutions. Gradually, step by step, transaction by transaction, a parallel global economic system begins to emerge. This shift affects tangible things in your daily life, even if the connections aren't always obvious. It influences where your consumer goods come from and what they cost. It affects which currencies are used for international transactions, which can impact exchange rates and the purchasing power of your dollars when you travel. It influences global investment flows, which can affect the value of your retirement accounts and pension funds. Most importantly, it challenges some of the basic assumptions that American economic policy has been built on for generations. The assumption that other countries will always need dollars. The assumption that American financial sanctions will always be effective because everyone has to use our banking system. The assumption that American markets are so important that other countries will accept unfavorable trade terms just to maintain access. What if those assumptions are no longer entirely true? What if other countries develop alternatives that allow them to conduct business without depending on American approval? That's not a hypothetical question anymore, friends. It's happening right now, and it's accelerating. But remember, God is preparing us for every new season. But these global economic shifts intersect with another significant consideration happening right here at home, one that touches on both our economic needs and our cultural identity, creating real discussions for leaders and for everyday citizens. Now, let's talk about immigration, but let's approach it from a practical, economic standpoint, rather than getting caught up in emotionally charged arguments. If you've been to a major hospital recently, you've probably noticed something that might not have been as obvious 30 or 40 years ago. A significant number of the doctors, nurses, technicians, and specialists caring for patients come from other countries. Walk through the corridors of any major medical center, and you'll hear accents from India, the Philippines, Eastern Europe, Latin America, and dozens of other places. These aren't people who couldn't find work in their home countries, friends. Many of them are educated professionals who chose to build their careers in America, contributing their gifts and talents. The same pattern shows up in technology companies, engineering firms, research laboratories, and many other skilled professions that are so vital to America's competitive advantage in the global economy. This isn't an accident or some coincidence. It's the direct result of decades of economic development that created more high-skilled jobs than we could fill with domestic workers alone. Here's a statistic that might surprise you. In many of America's most advanced technology companies, somewhere between 25 and 40% of the engineers and computer scientists weren't born in the United States. They came here for education, stayed for opportunities, and now help maintain America's technological leadership in areas like artificial intelligence, renewable energy, and medical research. Now, here's where the situation gets truly interesting and perhaps challenging. Much of our current public discussion focuses on dramatically reducing immigration, sometimes by large amounts. Leaders promise to secure the border and put America first by making it much harder for people from other countries to live and work here. These messages resonate with voters who are concerned about job competition, cultural shifts, or national security. But at the same time, entire industries that are crucial to America's economic competitiveness depend heavily on those who immigrate, not just in agriculture or construction, where this dependence is well known, but also in the high-tech, high-skill sectors that are supposed to be our strength against international competition. It's like saying you want to have the best basketball team in the league, while simultaneously choosing not to recruit talented players from other cities. Or like a restaurant owner complaining that they can't find good chefs, while also refusing to hire anyone who wasn't born within 50 miles of the restaurant. The logic simply doesn't hold together when you prayerfully think it through. And this situation becomes even more complex when you consider the broader economic realities. Many of these immigrants, particularly the skilled ones with advanced degrees, aren't taking jobs away from American workers. No, they're often filling positions that remain vacant because we don't produce enough qualified candidates domestically. At the same time, they're starting companies that create jobs for other Americans, paying taxes that support local communities, and contributing to Social Security and Medicare systems that millions of current retirees depend on for their financial security. But the public discussion often gets framed in simple either-or terms. You're either for immigration or against it. You either want open borders or closed borders. You either support American workers or foreign workers. The reality, friends, is infinitely more nuanced and complicated. We need certain types of immigration for key sectors of our economy to function properly, while also needing to manage the pace, scale, and type of immigration in ways that don't overwhelm communities or create unfair competition for American workers in other sectors. And here I'm focusing on the legal aspects of immigration, recognizing the complexities involved in such a multifaceted topic. If you truly look at it with an open mind and a compassionate heart, the tension surrounding immigration reflects something deeper that America has been grappling with throughout its history. We're simultaneously a nation built by immigrants and a nation that's always seeking to have honest, practical conversations about immigration policy that balance economic needs with cultural considerations and security concerns. It's a journey, but I believe we can find the right path. These situations in trade policy, in immigration discussions, in our approach to global economic competition, they're all signs of something much larger and more historically significant. They reflect the unique challenges faced by a leading nation that's discovering the world has fundamentally transformed around it, often in ways that make previous strategies less effective or even counterproductive. Throughout history, this is actually a very familiar pattern that every major power eventually encounters. There comes a moment when the strategies, policies, and assumptions that made a country dominant start working against it, and when rising nations begin to challenge that position in ways that can't be easily dismissed or contained. The British Empire faced exactly this kind of transition in the early 20th century. For more than a century, Britain had been the unquestioned global leader. Their navy controlled the seas. Their currency dominated international trade. Their companies led most major industries, and their political system served as a model for emerging democracies around the world. But by the 1920s and 1930s, it became clear that other countries, particularly the United States, but also Germany, Japan, and eventually the Soviet Union, were growing stronger economically and militarily. Britain had to adapt from being the unquestioned global superpower to being an important, but no longer dominant, player on the world stage. This transition was challenging and required wisdom. It involved making difficult choices about military spending, international commitments, and economic policies. It took decades to fully play out, and there were plenty of learning opportunities along the way. But Britain did adapt, and while it's no longer an empire, it remained influential and prosperous even after its period of global dominance ended. The lesson here isn't that America is destined to fade away or become irrelevant, friends. That's neither inevitable nor aligned with God's plan for our nation. Britain today is still an important, wealthy, influential country with a high standard of living and significant global impact. But Britain had to learn how to be successful and influential without being dominant. And that required fundamental changes in how they approached international relations, economic policy, and national priorities. America is facing a similar transition right now, but I believe we have the wisdom and the resilience to navigate it. The challenge, my friends, is that institutions, policies, political systems, and national mindsets that were built during an era of clear dominance don't always adapt quickly to new realities. It's like trying to steer a massive cruise ship. Even when you turn the wheel hard in one direction, it takes a long time for the ship to actually change course. And during that time, you might drift into waters you didn't intend to navigate. Meanwhile, the world doesn't pause and wait for America to figure things out. Other countries keep growing their economies, developing new technologies, and forming new trade relationships. International markets keep evolving, global supply chains keep shifting, and new centers of innovation keep emerging. The pace of change doesn't slow down just because one country is having difficulty adapting to new circumstances. This creates what we might call an adaptation gap, a period between when global circumstances change and when a country's institutions, policies, and strategies catch up with those new realities. During that gap, situations can multiply, unintended consequences become more common, and the distance between political promises and practical outcomes tends to grow wider and wider. We're living in that adaptation gap right now, and you can see evidence of it everywhere. But here's what's crucial for you to understand and why I, Joel Osteen, your pastor and television preacher, wanted to share this message with you. Recognizing these shifts and transitions isn't about pessimism, fear-mongering, or giving up on America's bright future. No, it's about clear-eyed realism, guided by faith, that allows us to make better decisions both as a country and as individuals and families. When you understand that certain policies might sound appealing, but produce unintended consequences that affect your finances, you can prepare accordingly with wisdom. When you recognize that global economic power is shifting in ways that affect currency values, trade flows, and investment returns, you can factor that knowledge into your retirement planning and investment decisions, trusting God for guidance. When you see that discussions about immigration, trade, and international relations are more complex than the sound bites and talking points suggest, you can form more nuanced opinions based on actual economic realities, rather than just political rhetoric, always seeking truth and understanding. Now let's bring this down to the human level, to the things that directly affect your daily life and your financial security. The economic trends we've been discussing, while sometimes abstract, translate into very concrete impacts on your cost of living, your healthcare expenses, housing costs, and the purchasing power of your retirement savings. If you're living on a fixed income, whether from Social Security, a pension, retirement savings, or some combination, you've probably already felt how even modest increases in the cost of living can squeeze your budget. When the price of groceries goes up by 10 or 15%, when utility bills increase, when healthcare costs continue their relentless climb, every extra dollar you have to spend is a dollar that can't go toward something else you need or enjoy. Now imagine what happens when broader economic shifts start affecting prices across multiple categories simultaneously. Tariffs that increase the cost of imported goods, labor shortages that drive up wages in some sectors, which then get passed along to consumers as higher prices for services. Energy costs that fluctuate based on international tensions and supply disruptions. All of these factors can combine to create an inflationary pressure that hits retirees and people on fixed incomes especially hard. But it's not just about prices and inflation, friends. These broader shifts also affect the value of investments, the stability of pension funds, and the long-term viability of Social Security and Medicare. When America's economic dominance starts to gently shift, when the dollar becomes less central to international trade, when American companies face stronger competition from foreign rivals, all of those changes can ripple through financial markets in ways that affect retirement portfolios and pension fund performance. The housing market provides another example of how global trends affect local realities. When international investors see the dollar as less stable or American assets as less attractive, that can affect everything from mortgage rates to property values. For seniors who own their homes, this might mean changes in property values that affect their net worth and estate planning. For those who rent, it might mean changes in rental costs that affect their monthly budgets. Healthcare costs present perhaps the most direct example of how these situations play out in daily life. Much of our medical equipment, many pharmaceutical ingredients, and significant amounts of medical technology come from overseas. When trade policies make imports more expensive, when international supply chains get disrupted, When currency fluctuations affect the cost of foreign-made medical products, all of those factors eventually show up in your medical bills and insurance premiums. But let me remind you, God is greater than any challenge. Yet, alongside these challenges and pressures, friends, new opportunities are also opening up, particularly in technology sectors that are reshaping entire industries. The rise of artificial intelligence, renewable energy systems, and digital communication technologies represents both a powerful force for change and a potentially empowering set of tools that can bless our lives. For those of us who remember the introduction of television, personal computers, and the internet, this pattern might feel familiar. Each of these technologies initially seemed threatening or even a bit overwhelming to many people, but eventually became normal parts of daily life that offered new conveniences and capabilities, truly expanding our horizons. Artificial intelligence is following a similar trajectory. What seemed like science fiction just a few years ago is now helping people manage their finances, communicate with family members, access healthcare services, and stay connected with their communities. Voice-activated assistants help seniors with mobility limitations control their home environment. Telemedicine platforms make it easier to consult with healthcare providers without traveling to medical offices. Online banking and digital payment systems provide greater convenience and security for managing finances. Renewable energy technologies are reducing electricity costs for many households while also creating new investment opportunities in jobs in manufacturing, installation, and maintenance. Electric vehicles are becoming more affordable and practical, potentially reducing transportation costs for families while also decreasing dependence on volatile global oil markets. But yes, technology also creates new considerations and challenges. Digital systems can be susceptible to breaches or manipulation. Automated systems can malfunction or make errors that affect people's finances or healthcare. The pace of technological change can make it difficult for older workers to adapt, potentially affecting their employment prospects and retirement planning. The key is approaching these technological changes with the same balanced perspective and God-given wisdom that your generation has applied to previous waves of innovation. Staying informed about new developments, adopting useful technologies gradually and thoughtfully, while maintaining healthy discernment about overhyped promises and unrealistic timelines. That's the path to navigate this new era. These domestic, economic, and technological changes are playing out against a backdrop of international tensions and challenges that might seem distant, but actually have direct impacts on our American economic conditions. The ongoing situations in Ukraine, rising tensions between nations like the United States and China, instability in the Middle East, these aren't just foreign policy issues that only matter to diplomats and military planners. No, they directly affect energy prices, supply chain reliability, international trade flows, and global financial markets. When major conflicts disrupt global supply chains, American consumers feel the effects through higher prices and product shortages. When international tensions lead to economic sanctions, American companies can lose access to foreign markets, and consumers can experience reduced availability of certain products. When global instability makes international investors nervous, capital flows shift in ways that can affect everything from stock market performance to real estate values to currency exchange rates. What's currently happening in Ukraine provides a clear example of how distant conflicts affect daily life in America. Disruptions to Ukrainian and Russian agricultural exports contributed to higher food prices worldwide. Energy market disruptions affected gasoline and heating costs. Supply chain interruptions affected the availability and cost of various manufactured goods. Even people who couldn't locate Ukraine on a map felt the economic effects of the conflict. Similarly, escalating tensions with China affect far more than just diplomatic relations. China is deeply integrated into global supply chains for electronics, clothing, pharmaceuticals, and countless other products that American families depend on. When political tensions lead to trade restrictions or supply chain diversification, those changes eventually show up as higher prices, longer delivery times, or reduced product availability for American consumers. Middle Eastern situations affect global energy markets, which influence gasoline prices, heating costs, and electricity rates across America. They also create broader economic uncertainties that can affect investment markets and currency values. The point isn't that America should avoid international engagement or try to isolate itself from global affairs. Friends, That's neither possible nor desirable in our interconnected world economy. The point is that international developments have domestic consequences, and understanding those connections helps individuals and families make better informed decisions about everything from investment strategies to household budgeting, always remembering that God is in control. So after all this information, and thank you for sticking with me, what does the future likely hold, and how can we prepare for it wisely rather than fearfully? Based on historical patterns and current trends, we're probably looking at a gradual adjustment in America's global standing, but not a sudden collapse or disappearance of our nation's influence and prosperity. Think of it as a purposeful transition from being the single dominant global power to being one of several major powers in a more interconnected world. This transition will likely be uneven and at times unpredictable. America will remain strong in many areas: technological innovation, military capability, cultural influence, higher education, while becoming relatively more competitive in others, like manufacturing, international trade, and financial leadership. American companies will still be global leaders in many industries, but they'll face stronger competition from Chinese, Indian, European, and other international rivals. The dollar will probably remain important in international finance, but other currencies and payment systems will play larger roles. For most Americans, this transition doesn't mean impending doom or dramatic declines in living standards. No, not at all. Britain remained prosperous and influential after its empire ended. Germany and Japan rebuilt successfully after World War II and became major economic powers without being military superpowers. Countries can be successful, wealthy, and influential without being globally dominant. But the transition does mean that some of the economic advantages Americans have enjoyed, like being able to run large trade deficits without significant consequences or having other countries automatically adopt American standards and regulations, will gradually diminish. It means American workers and companies will face more competition. American consumers might pay higher prices for some goods, and American policymakers will have a broader range of options for influencing global events. The good news, friends, is that your generation has lived through major transitions before and knows how to adapt. You've seen America successfully navigate the end of the Cold War, the rise of global competition in manufacturing, the transition from an industrial economy to a service and technology economy, and multiple economic recessions and recoveries. You've witnessed how initial disruptions, like the introduction of personal computers, which many people feared would eliminate jobs, often lead to new opportunities and improved living standards. Even if the transition period involves uncertainty and challenges, you understand that economic and political cycles are normal, that periods of difficulty are often followed by periods of growth and renewal, and that adaptability and resilience matter more than trying to predict exactly what will happen next. The practical wisdom you've gained from decades of experience, the importance of diversification, the value of maintaining emergency savings, the benefits of staying informed without becoming overwhelmed by daily news cycles, the importance of maintaining strong community relationships, all of that knowledge remains relevant and valuable. What we need now is to combine that practical wisdom with a clear-eyed understanding of current realities, always anchored in faith. That means staying informed about economic and political developments without getting caught up in partisan rhetoric or fear-based messaging. It means making financial and personal decisions based on facts and trends rather than wishful thinking or denial. It means preparing for a range of possible outcomes rather than betting everything on one particular scenario. Most importantly, it means approaching uncertainty with confidence and faith rather than anxiety, because uncertainty also creates incredible opportunities for those who are prepared to recognize and act on them. Friends, I told you something significant was coming, and indeed it's here. The realities in economic policy are playing out in real time. Global power is shifting in ways that affect everything from trade relationships to currency values. Technology is accelerating change in both challenging and beneficial directions. International situations are creating economic ripple effects that reach into our American communities. But recognizing these changes isn't about fear or pessimism. It's about preparation, about opportunity, and about faith in God's guiding hand. Your generation has successfully navigated major transitions before. You know that adaptability matters more than prediction, that God-given wisdom matters more than human ideology, and that staying connected to your communities and precious families matters more than trying to control outcomes you can't influence. The best thing we can do is keep asking questions, keep paying attention to both local and global developments, keep learning from each other's experiences, and keep applying the practical wisdom that comes from having lived through previous periods of uncertainty and change. If you're still with me and you found this perspective helpful, please do like this video so it can reach more people who need to hear this message of hope and understanding. And leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what changes you're noticing most in your own life and how you're preparing for the transitions ahead, always trusting in God's plan. Because ultimately, friends, we are all in this together, and with God, all things are possible.